Her name was Elsie. She lived on the edge of the Wyoming territory with a child who could no longer walk and a heart that had learned to beat quietly so it wouldn't break too loud. The wind out there didn't care if you were strong or weak. It blew all the same. Her cabin sat crooked against the hills, its roof patched with old grain sacks and its walls leaning inward, like they, too, were tired of standing. Elsie had stopped hoping for change. Now, she just hoped the snow would hold off until morning. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, not really. Just sips of boiled cornmeal and the crusts left behind by her son. Daniel was 6, thin as a reed and small for his age. His legs had stopped working after the fever came through 2 winters ago. One morning, he simply couldn't stand. They'd waited for it to pass, thinking it was weakness. But it never did, and no doctor ever came that far into the hills. Not for a poor woman with no husband and a boy that the town had already written off. That morning, the frost crept over the inside of their only window. Elsie tucked her threadbare shawl around her shoulders and stirred what little flour she had into a weak dough. She shaped it with shaking hands, whispered a prayer, and laid the single biscuit on a flat stone in the hearth. The coals were almost gone, but she blew gently to wake them. She didn't say anything as it cooked. Daniel had already asked last night if there would be more. She'd lied and said yes. When a biscuit was done, she broke it in half. The smaller piece she pressed in her own palm. She looked at it for a long time, then turned and handed the bigger one to Daniel. He looked at it like it was gold. "Aren't you going to eat?" "Already did," she lied again, voice soft. He broke off a corner of the biscuit and held it out to her. "Then have more." Elsie shook her head and kissed the top of his tangled brown hair. "Mama's full. You eat it." Outside, snow was starting again. Light flakes, soft as ash. She went to the window and stared past the hills. There was nothing. No riders, no smoke in the distance, no sign of anything coming to change what their lives had become. She sat on the floor beside Daniel and ran her fingers through his hair. "When it warms up, maybe we can go down to the river again," she said. "It's too far," he whispered. "You carried me last time." "I'm stronger now," she lied again. The sound of hooves came like a dream. Slow, steady, like someone in no rush. She stood, startled. Daniel looked up wide-eyed. They both waited. The sound came closer. When a knock finally came, it wasn't loud. Just one knock. Then silence. Elsie opened the door, and wind rushed in behind a man wearing a weathered coat and dust-covered boots. His face was half hidden under the brim of his hat. He looked at her for a long second without saying anything. Then his eyes dropped to Daniel behind her. "I was headed toward Laramie," the man said, voice dry. "Snow caught me up." Elsie nodded, stepping aside. She didn't have anything to offer, but turning someone away felt wrong. Not when she'd begged heaven for someone to notice them. He walked in without hesitation, but his steps were slow, respectful. He looked around, took in the broken rocking chair, the empty shelves, the blanket nailed over the doorway to the back room. The fire caught his eye. He stepped closer, crouched, and pulled out a match from inside his coat. With practiced ease, he added a few sticks and blew gently. The flame caught stronger than before. Daniel coughed once, then again. The man glanced over but said nothing. Elsie moved quickly to lift the boy and bring him closer to the warmth. "You don't have to stay long," she said. "I'll leave when the snow stops," he said simply. She didn't ask his name. He didn't ask hers. For the rest of the day, the three of them sat in silence. She worked on mending a hole in the blanket while Daniel watched the stranger with wide, curious eyes. The man, for his part, seemed to study the fire like it was telling him something only he could understand. That night, Elsie gave Daniel the last of the biscuit. She hadn't touched food all day. Her stomach ached, but she was used to it. The stranger sat near the hearth, eating from a small tin of beans he'd pulled from his saddlebag. After a moment, he stood and set the rest of it beside her. "For the boy," he said. She nodded without thanks because she was too proud for that. But she did take it. Daniel licked the spoon clean, then fell asleep on the floor, curled against the stranger's coat. Elsie stayed up after that. She watched the man through the low firelight. He hadn't said more than 10 words all day, but he didn't seem dangerous, just tired, like her, like he'd seen more than he wanted and didn't have the words to explain it. In the early hours, when the wind howled again, she saw him get up and quietly put more wood on the fire. Not because anyone asked, just because he saw it needed doing. When morning came, the snow had covered the horse's tracks. The man didn't seem in a hurry to go. "I'll fix your fence," he said, walking out the door before she could answer. She followed him, barefoot in the snow, the pain sharp against her skin. Why? He didn't stop. Because it needs fixing. And he did. That whole day, while Daniel sat inside wrapped in every blanket they owned, the stranger mended the fence line. He replaced 2 posts with logs he chopped himself. When he found her woodshed nearly empty, he started splitting wood without being asked. He worked slow, steady, never asking for help, never saying a word more than he had to. That night, he gave them another tin of food. Elsie ate for the first time in 3 days. She watched Daniel fall asleep beside the man's coat again, then turned to the stranger. "You lost someone?" she asked softly. He looked up, his eyes like winter. "Yeah, me too," she whispered. They didn't speak after that. There was nothing more to say. In the days that followed, he stayed. He fixed the leaking roof, patched the window, and made a better seat for Daniel, so the boy wouldn't have to sit on the cold floor anymore. He didn't ask about the boy's legs. He just built a sled from scrap wood and ropes and showed Elsie how to pull it easily over snow. "You're kind," she said one morning, brushing frost from her lashes. He looked at her like it was the first time he'd really seen her. "No," he said, "I'm not." But Daniel smiled more now, and Elsie started sleeping through the night. Not every night, but some. And when the snow melted and the first flowers pushed through the dirt near the porch, the man took off his coat and hung it by the door like he meant to stay. The man's name was Levi Carter. Elsie didn't ask at first, but one evening as she stitched Daniel's worn sleeve back together, he said it plain. No build-up, just sat down across from her, rubbing a knife blade against a whetstone, and said, "My name's Levi." She looked up from her sewing, nodded once, and said, "Elsie." That was it. A name for a name. Enough to build something out of nothing. Levi had that quiet kind of weight to him, the kind that fills up a room without trying. He never smiled, not really, but he wasn't cold either. He just seemed like a man who'd lived through too much and stopped expecting things to get better. When he looked at Daniel, it was like he saw his own ghost in the boy. Not pity, though. Never that. Just a slow sort of understanding, like he knew what it was to carry something broken that would never fix. Elsie came to learn that he'd been in the war, Union side, cavalry. He didn't say what he did, just said, "I came back wrong," and left it at that. She didn't push. Whatever haunted him, it stayed behind his eyes. And some days, when the wind died and the world got too still, she saw him drift off in his silence, staring through the window like he wasn't in the room anymore. She recognized that look. She'd had it herself. As spring started to warm the edges of the land, people from the nearest town finally took notice. Willow Bend wasn't more than a dusty strip of buildings, saloon, general store, blacksmith, church, but word spread quick there. Word about a stranger fixing up the old homestead with Elsie and her crippled boy. The first to come sniffing around was Lena Morley, the preacher's wife. She rode up on a chestnut mare, all prim and proper, lace gloves and a forced smile. "Elsie, dear," she called, dismounting like she was walking into a tea house. "Heard you've got company out here." Elsie wiped her hands on her apron and stepped down off the porch. "Snow trapped a rider," she said simply. "He's been helping with the land." Lena's eyes swept over the new fence posts, the repaired roof line, the freshly turned garden beds. "Helping, is he? Folks might say more than that." Elsie didn't flinch. "Let him." Lena raised her brows, smirked like she'd touched a nerve. "Well, I suppose we'll see you at church soon. Be good for Daniel, seeing people, seeing God's house. We'll come when we can," Elsie said, stepping back. The conversation ended there. Levi had been inside when Lena arrived, but he watched from the window, quiet as ever. That night, he asked, "You get trouble from them often?" "Only when I look too alive," Elsie replied. The next person to come wasn't so polite. His name was Arlen Webb, a rancher's son with more land than sense. He tried once, back before Daniel got sick, to court Elsie, though court was a generous word. He showed up drunk one night, full of promises and breath that stank of whiskey and sweat. She turned him away, and he spat on her floor. "You'll come knocking someday," he'd said, "when you're starving." He hadn't been back since. But now, with Levi around, something in Arlen twisted. He rode up late one afternoon with two other men, friends of his who didn't wear kindness on their faces. They didn't dismount, just sat there on their horses, boots kicking dust, arms crossed. "Heard you took in a hired hand," Arlen said. Levi stood on the porch, hat low, arms loose at his sides. "Just passing through," he said. "That's so." Arlen spat. "Looks more like you're playing house with the widow and her gimp kid." Levi didn't blink. "Say that again," he said, voice low. Elsie stepped between them, her body tight, hands at her sides. "Arlen, go home." Arlen's grin spread. "You got no husband, no church behind you, no name worth anything. You think this man's gonna stay? Or are you just laying down with what's left of you?" Before Levi could move, Elsie stepped forward and slapped Arlen hard enough to turn his head. His friends jerked in their saddles, but Levi didn't budge. Arlen's eyes darkened, his jaw working. "You think you're safe now?" he hissed. "You ain't. You never were." They rode off in a spray of dirt, leaving behind a taste of something ugly in the air. That night, Elsie sat on the steps with her knees pulled to her chest, watching the stars blink through the wind. Levi brought out a blanket and sat beside her. "You could have heard him," she said. "I still might." She looked at him sideways. "You got a reason to stay?" He didn't answer right away. "Daniel, you don't ask me what I've done. Don't look at me like I'm dangerous." "You're not," she said. "I might be." Elsie turned toward him. He laughs more now. "I don't have to lie to him as much." "You did that." Levi looked down, picking at a thread in the blanket. "You feed him before yourself. I seen you do it. That's not weakness. That's the only kind of strength that matters." After that, he started building a proper ramp for Daniel to get outside easier. He found an old wagon and took parts from it, fashioned a chair with wheels out of scrap. It didn't roll smooth, but it worked. Daniel cried the first time he got to will himself to the edge of the creek. "You're gonna make me run," Levi muttered, trailing behind the boy, who giggled like he hadn't in years. That sound made something break loose in both of them, Elsie and Levi. She started to hum again, soft songs from her girlhood, and he, slowly, began to leave his gun belt on the hook by the door. One day, while digging a deeper ditch behind the cabin, Levi finally told her about the boy he lost. His name was Peter. He was 4 when I went off to fight. When I came back, they told me fever took him. My wife left the same week. Said I was already gone, and she just made it official. Elsie didn't speak. She didn't have to. She just knelt down beside him, hands still muddy from planting. Later that week, Elsie took Daniel into town for the first time since winter. She walked beside his chair while Levi rode quietly behind. People stared. Some turned away, but Daniel held his head high, eyes wide at the world beyond their trees. At the general store, Elsie picked out flour, beans, some cloth scraps. When she got to the counter, she reached for her coin purse, but Levi had already set down a small stack of bills. "I got it," he said. She shook her head. "No, let me," he said, gentler this time. She paused, then nodded. Outside the store, Arlen waited again, this time alone. "You begging now, Elsie?" he sneered. "That a man's coin?" Levi stepped forward. "We done with you yet?" Arlen's hand dropped to his belt, but he wasn't fast enough. Levi had his hand on Arlen's collar and half a breath, slammed him hard against the water trough. "Next time you speak her name, you're going to pick your teeth up off the ground." Arlen spat blood, muttered a curse, then ran. He didn't come back after that. Back at the homestead, Elsie stitched a quilt for Daniel from the cloth Levi bought. Each patch held something different. An old shirt of Levi's, a piece of the curtains that used to hang in her mother's kitchen, scraps from the apron Daniel had outgrown. It wasn't just a quilt. It was proof of effort, of memory, of things stitched back together. Late that night, while Daniel slept in the corner, Elsie stood by the doorway, her voice soft in the dark. "You don't have to fix everything," she told Levi. He looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "It's the only thing I know how to do." She stepped closer. "Then stay and fix it slow. With me." He didn't speak, just reached for her hand. And she let him. That spring moved slow, but full. The kind of full that wasn't loud or bright, just steady. After so many years where each season felt like it might be the last one they could survive, Elsie and Daniel were suddenly living days where they weren't just getting through, but holding on. There was still dirt under their fingernails and hunger that came around too often, but now there was another pair of hands helping, another pair of eyes watching the road, another soul keeping the fire going when she was too tired to get up. Levi didn't talk much, but what he said mattered. He started carving things for Daniel. Small animals from whittled wood, little wheels, and shapes the boy could hold and turn in his lap. Daniel kept them in a sack beside his bed and counted them each morning like they were treasure. He stopped asking questions about when his legs would work again. Instead, he asked when Levi would teach him to carve. Once he stopped dropping the knife, Levi said one day, catching the dull blade Daniel had fumbled. "I'm not scared," Daniel said. "Then you're halfway there." Levi showed him how to brace the handle, how to shave a curl off clean. Daniel watched him like the blade was magic. Elsie watched too. Not the knife, though. She watched Levi's face, how calm he was with Daniel, how steady his hand stayed, even when the boy asked the same thing 5 times. Levi never scolded. He never raised his voice. He just stayed, and that staying became its own kind of language between the three of them. Some mornings, Levi would already be outside chopping wood by the time Elsie opened the door. Other days, he was inside, boiling coffee with a handful of wild mint he'd found by the river. Sometimes, in those soft hours before the sun rose too high, he and Elsie would sit on the porch, quiet, sharing warmth and silence. The first time Elsie laughed, it was real laughter, the kind that startled even her. It was because of the chicken. They bought a hen from town, a scrawny thing with missing feathers. Levi built her a rough pen, and Daniel named her Miss Featherpants. The chicken had a habit of escaping. One morning, Levi had to chase it half a mile down the hill, and when he came back, holding it upside down by the legs, mud smeared across his chest, Elsie couldn't help it. She covered her mouth at first, but then it broke out, a bright, surprised laugh that echoed across the hills. Levi set the chicken down gently, then grinned, an actual grin, and said, "Next time, she's supper." That night, Daniel insisted they give Miss Featherpants a bath. They used one of Elsie's tin pans, and all 3 of them ended up soaked. Levi accidentally knocked the pan over, and Daniel squealed with laughter, slipping on the floor. Elsie caught him just in time. She looked up at Levi, her dress clinging to her knees, and something passed between them, a flicker of warmth that felt like a door cracking open. That was how it happened. Not with grand declarations, but with small, unshouted things. In the evenings, Elsie started humming again, sometimes singing soft lullabies from her childhood. Daniel would fall asleep to the sound of her voice and the crackle of the fire. Levi would sit by the hearth, whittling or mending gear, but he never interrupted her. He just listened. One night, after Daniel was asleep, Levi said, "You sing like you still believe someone's listening." Elsie folded her hands in her lap. "Maybe someone is." Levi didn't reply right away. Then he said, "You ever think about leaving this place? Going somewhere easier?" Elsie looked around their cabin, the patched roof, the clay stove, the empty shelves, and then down at her hands. "Easier's never felt real to me. But safe? This is starting to feel like safe." He nodded. "Then I'll stay." The next day, they cleared more land behind the cabin for planting. Levi taught her how to dig irrigation lines from the creek, how to read the soil. Daniel rode along on his makeshift chair, dragging sticks through the dirt like he was drawing blueprints for a castle. At midday, they stopped to eat, sitting under the shade of a leaning pine. Levi handed Elsie a slice of smoked meat and half a biscuit. She took it without protest. They'd stopped fighting over who deserved to eat more. Now they just shared what they had. "You ever miss a real town?" Levi asked. Elsie chewed slowly. "Sometimes, but not the way it made me feel." "What way was that?" "Small, invisible, or worse, pitted." Levi looked at her, eyes narrowed slightly. "They don't know strength when they see it." A breeze passed between them, lifting strands of her hair. She smiled, not because she believed him fully, but because he said it like it was just truth. Not flattery, just what was. Later that week, Daniel got sick. It wasn't bad, just a cold, but enough to stir up old fears. Elsie sat beside his bed for hours, wiping his forehead, watching his chest rise and fall. Levi brought in herbs and made a poultice for the congestion, then stayed up with her through the night. They didn't talk much, just sat on either side of the bed, listening to the boy breathe. When Daniel woke the next morning with color in his cheeks, Elsie wept. Levi took her hand and didn't let go until the sun came through the shutters. "I thought I'd lose him," she whispered. "You won't," he said. "How can you be sure?" He didn't speak, just brushed her hair back from her face and kissed her forehead. Not a lover's kiss, not yet. Just something deeper, a promise without words. Days passed. The garden began to sprout. Levi built a fence to keep out deer. Daniel made signs from bits of wood, "Keep out" and "Private land," and nailed them to the posts. They were crooked, but Levi didn't correct him. He just helped hammer them in straight. In town, people had started talking less. Arlen hadn't shown his face again, and even Lena's whispers had quieted. Still, Elsie could feel their eyes when she passed. But now, she didn't lower her head. Not with Levi walking beside her, not with Daniel asking every question under the sun. One afternoon, they passed the preacher on the road. He tipped his hat toward Levi, then looked at Elsie and said, "The Lord moves in strange ways." Elsie smiled politely. "Sometimes he sends strangers with hammers and horses." The preacher nodded, unsure how to reply. They kept walking. That night, Levi sat outside long after Daniel went to bed. Elsie joined him, bringing a tin mug of warm tea. "You still have that look sometimes," she said, settling beside him. "What look?" "Like you're not sure you're allowed to be happy." He didn't respond at first. Then, happiness feels like a trick, like something that gets pulled away the second you start believing in it. She nodded. "I know." He looked at her then, not like he was weighing what to say, but like he already knew. "I see you," he said. "Not the widow, not the tired mother. I see you, Elsie." She blinked hard, then reached for his hand. He took it palm to palm, fingers laced. And for the first time, neither of them pulled away. They started to make plans after that. Not big ones, but real ones. Levi wanted to build a smokehouse. Elsie talked about raising goats. Daniel started asking if he'd ever be able to ride a real horse. "You will," Levi promised, "even if I have to build the saddle myself." On warmer days, they picnicked in a clearing. Levi brought out a worn book of poetry he'd carried for years. Elsie read it aloud while Daniel picked wildflowers. One poem ended with the line, "There is no fire like the one that stays." She read it twice. Slowly, Levi didn't say a word, but his eyes stayed fixed on her mouth. That evening, he kissed her. Soft, careful, with hands that didn't grab but held. It wasn't hungry or fast. It was slow, the kind of kiss you give someone when you've waited your whole life to feel safe. Elsie kissed him back with the same care, and for once, nothing hurt. They didn't speak about it the next day, but they didn't have to. The way Levi touched her waist as he passed, the way she rested her head against his shoulder on the porch swing, it was all understood. It was late June when they danced. There was no music, just Daniel clapping his hands and humming a rhythm he made up. Levi held Elsie in the yard under the stars, swaying side to side. She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. "You keep saving me," she whispered into his chest. "No," Levi said, holding her tighter. "You saved me first." Summer came heavy that year. The days stretched out long and hot. dragging behind them a silence too thick to ignore. The garden dried quicker than expected, and even the creek started to shrink. But it wasn't the weather that shifted first. It was the quiet between Elsie and Levi, a quiet that no longer felt peaceful. It felt uncertain, like something unspoken had been waiting too long to be said. Levi still rose early, still fixed what needed fixing, still built up Daniel's chair with new wood pieces and sketched blueprints for a better one. But his eyes were far off again. That haunted stare she hadn't seen in months started creeping back. Sometimes at night, he'd walk outside and not come back in for hours. She'd wake to an empty bed and find him sitting in the dark, staring at the woods like they held a past that wouldn't let him go. Elsie tried to ask him once, "You dream of the war?" He didn't look at her, just said, "I don't dream, not anymore." But she knew that wasn't true. Some nights he mumbled in his sleep, flinched at sounds no one else heard. One night, Daniel dropped a pan, and Levi hit the ground so fast it scared them both. He stood slowly afterward, eyes wide, breathing hard, shaking his head like he didn't know where he was. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry." She touched his arm gently. "You don't have to say that." "Yes, I do." Later, when Daniel went to bed, she pressed him again. "Tell me what's wrong." He shook his head. "You wouldn't want to know. Try me. I've done things, Elsie. Things I'll never be clean from." "You think I haven't?" She shot back, more sharply than she meant. He looked at her, surprised. So she sat down and spoke what she'd never told anyone. "I left my family behind to marry a man I barely knew. I thought love could be built from duty, but he died of whiskey and anger. I didn't cry when he was gone. I cried when I realized I didn't miss him. I buried him alone. Then I buried myself in shame." She paused, breathing hard. "I ain't clean either, Levi, but I wake up and take care of this boy, and I've built a life out of scraps. Don't stand there and tell me I wouldn't understand." He sat down beside her, head in his hands. "You ever think maybe some people just ain't meant to be happy?" She didn't answer. Not then, because deep down, a part of her wondered the same. A few days later, Daniel fell. Not badly, but enough. He tried to wheel himself over the rocky edge near the garden, and the chair tipped. His hands got scraped, his chin bloodied. Levi got there first and lifted him up, but the boy was screaming, not from the pain, but from fear. "I can't even roll right." Daniel sobbed. "I'm useless." "Don't say that," Elsie said, kneeling. "You are not." "I want to walk," he screamed, pushing her hand away. "I want to walk like other kids." Levi picked him up then, holding him tightly. "You don't have to walk to be strong." "But I want to," Daniel cried, his face buried in Levi's shirt. They brought him inside and cleaned his cuts. But something had cracked open in the boy that didn't close again. He went quiet after that, distant. Wouldn't talk much. Wouldn't play with his carved animals. Just stared out the window, jaw tight, fist balled in his lap. And it did something to Levi, seeing Daniel like that. He started going to town more often, always with a reason. Supplies, he'd say. Scrap metal. Hinges. But he'd come back with empty eyes. Elsie knew something was shifting. Something he hadn't told her yet. Then one night, he didn't come home. The sun went down. The porch lantern burnt. But Levi's horse stood alone in the corral. Elsie sat up all night, her stomach twisted with dread. She checked the barn, the woods, walked to the edge of the ridge with a lantern in hand, calling his name. Nothing. Daniel woke the next morning asking, "Where's Levi?" "I don't know," she said. "He didn't return that day, or the next." On the third day, she found a folded paper tucked under the knife block. It was short, scrawled in ink that looked rushed. "Elsie, I don't want to bring harm to your door. I've tried to be better, but I keep waking up thinking about what I've done. I killed men, not just in war, after, when I wandered. Wanted a son, might be looking for me. If he comes here, I won't forgive myself. So I'm leaving. I love you. I love Daniel. I just don't think I deserve this peace." She read it over and over, each line sinking like stone. At first, she was furious, then numb, then just hollow. She crumpled the paper in her fist and went inside. That night, She didn't sing. She didn't hum. She just sat in the chair beside Daniel's bed, watching the fire burn low. Daniel didn't ask again. A week passed. Then two. The cabin fell quiet again, like it had before. But not the same. This silence was full of memory, of laughter that had lived here once, of footsteps now missing, of a coat still hanging by the door. Then the stranger came. He rode up mid-morning, alone, wearing a black coat and a mean smile. His horse kicked dust at the porch steps as he dismounted. Elsie stepped out, her shotgun in hand, heart hammering. "You Levi's woman?" the man asked. She didn't answer. "He put a bullet in my brother's chest 3 years back. Never said why. Didn't matter much. Been trailing him ever since. I don't know where he is," she said. "That's so." His eyes dropped to the wooden ramp, to the boy watching from inside. "Looks like he left you behind." Elsie cocked the shotgun. "You step 1 inch closer, and I'll make sure your brother's not lonely." The man didn't laugh, just gave her one long look and spat into the dirt. "He'll come back," he said. "They always do, for the ones they care about." Then he rode off. Elsie stood on the porch long after he was gone, breath shaking, fingers white around the barrel. That night, she took down the coat, held it in her arms like something holy, then folded it and put it in Levi's empty chair. Days blurred after that. She tried to push through, to smile for Daniel, to sing again, but her voice broke halfway through every song. She kept the farm going, fixed what broke, tended the garden. But without Levi's steady hands, everything took longer. Everything felt heavier. Daniel didn't ask about him anymore. He just stopped smiling. Then came the letter. It arrived in the hands of a boy from town, a rider for the post. He handed it to her without a word, tipped his hat, and rode off. The envelope was wrinkled and dirty. No return name. Inside, a single sheet. "Elsie, I've tried staying gone. Tried convincing myself it was right. But every day I'm not with you feels wrong. I know the danger. I know what I carry. But I'd rather die by it than keep living like I don't have a home. If I don't come back, tell Daniel he was the best part of me. And you're the first light I ever trusted. I'll be at the ridge by the river 2 nights from now. If you can forgive me, come. If you can't, I'll understand. Levi." Elsie stood with the paper in her hand, her knees buckling beneath her. Daniel wheeled up beside her. "Is he alive?" he asked. She nodded, eyes full of tears. "Then go to him," Daniel whispered. "Please." 2 nights later, she went. She wore her oldest boots, and the dress he once said made her look like sunflowers. The path was steep, the trail winding. She reached the ridge near midnight. The moon was bright enough to paint shadows. And there he was, standing beside the river, coat in hand, eyes lifted to the stars. When he saw her, he didn't speak, just stepped forward slow, like he couldn't believe she was real. "I was scared," he said finally. "So was I. I thought I'd ruin what you had. You made it better." He hesitated. "He's still looking for me. That man, he might come back. I know. You could lose everything. I already did when you left." He looked at her, face raw, voice cracking. "Do you still love me?" She stepped into him, took his hand, laid it against her heart. "You never left this place." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her like a man who'd been dying without breath. They stayed that way a long time. When they returned to the cabin, Daniel was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. He didn't say anything, just reached out and took Levi's hand. And the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was peace. Real, hard-earned peace. And for the first time in their lives, all 3 of them believed it might last. The heat broke on a Monday. The wind shifted, dry and sharp, and clouds rolled in from the east. Thick, mean ones that turned the sky an angry gray. Elsie knew storms like that. They didn't just blow through. They brought something with them. And that morning, she woke with a sick feeling low in her gut. She went out to feed the chickens, and Levi was already splitting wood with his back turned to her, the axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. But something in the way he moved, tight, like he was holding his breath, told her he'd felt it too. They didn't speak much that day. Daniel was fussy, restless in his chair, snapping at the cat, refusing to eat. Levi tried to get him to work on his carving again, but the boy just stared out the window. "He's coming, isn't he?" Daniel asked softly when Elsie tucked him into bed. She froze. "What makes you say that?" "I just know," he whispered. "You're both scared again." Elsie brushed the hair off his forehead, swallowing the lump in her throat. "If he does come, we'll be ready." "You're not alone, Daniel." That night, Levi didn't sleep. He sat by the fire with the rifle across his knees. He hadn't picked it up in weeks. It still bore the scar of a burn near the trigger, something from long ago he'd never explained. Elsie came to him around midnight, wrapped in her shawl, her eyes soft but steady. "I thought I was done running," he said. "You are," she said. "This isn't running. This is standing." He looked at her like she was something far away, like a star he didn't deserve to wish on. "What if I can't protect you?" "You already did," she said. "When you showed up, when you stayed." The next day was quiet. Too quiet. The wind died down. Birds didn't sing. Even Miss Featherpants didn't peck around like usual. It felt like the world was holding its breath. And by noon, the rider came. Same black coat. Same dead-eyed look. He didn't rush. He rode slow, deliberate, like a man walking through a dream he'd already had 100 times. Levi stepped off the porch before the horse even stopped. Elsie stood in the doorway, her shotgun resting at her side, Daniel watching from behind the curtain. The man dismounted and looked Levi over with a half-smile. "Didn't think you'd still be here," he said. "I am," Levi said. "And the woman? She's here too." The man's hand hovered near his holster. "You took my brother's life. He bled out in a ditch while you rode away." "I remember," Levi said. He had his gun drawn on a kid, a scared farm boy, maybe 16. Told him to drop his trousers and kneel. I gave him a chance to walk away. You still killed him. He made me choose." The man looked past him then, toward the cabin, and Elsie stepped forward. "This has nothing to do with us," she said. "You're wrong," he said, "because he came here. He brought his mess to your doorstep." "I invited him," she said. "I'd do it again." Levi's voice dropped low. "It ends here. You can try to take it out on me, but you'll leave them out of it." The man's hand twitched. The silence held. Then he drew. Levi was faster. 2 shots cracked through the valley. Birds exploded from the trees. When it was over, the man lay still in the dirt, blood spreading in a dark pool beneath him. Levi stood over him, chest heaving, smoke rising from the barrel. Daniel was screaming. Elsie ran to him, lifted him from the window. "It's okay," she said, her voice shaking. "It's over." But Daniel sobbed into her neck. "It's not okay." He almost died. He almost left again. Outside, Levi stared at his hands like he didn't know what they were. Elsie came to him slowly. "You didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," he whispered. She touched his chest. "Then you chose to stay. You chose us." They buried the man on the edge of the woods. No cross, no name, just a hole in the earth and a long silence afterward. Levi didn't speak for 2 days. He worked like a man, trying to sweat the blood out of his skin. Fixed the roof again, though it didn't need fixing. Cut firewood that wouldn't be used for months. Elsie let him. But one night, when he sat on the porch and didn't come in for supper, she stepped out and sat beside him. "You think you're poison," she said softly. "But you're not. I've killed more men than I can count," he said. "Sometimes I don't even remember their faces. You remember the ones you saved?" He looked at her. "I never saved anyone." "You saved my son," she said. "You gave him back hope. He didn't have that before you came. I didn't either." Tears welled up in his eyes, but he looked away. She reached for his hand. "You think you're cursed because you survived things that should have broken you. But all that means is you've lived. And you're still here. With us. With me." He let her hold his hand. Let her pull him back from wherever he kept disappearing to. And for the first time, he cried. It wasn't loud. Wasn't ugly. Just a quiet, shuddering release. The kind of tears that had waited years for a safe place to fall. Elsie held him through it. Didn't speak. Didn't try to make it okay. Just let him grieve. When he was done, he said, "I don't know how to be the kind of man you and Daniel deserve. "You're already him," she said. "You just haven't seen it yet." The days after that felt different. Not easy, but lighter. Levi didn't stop working, but he started smiling again. A little. He helped Daniel make a sling for his arm so he could carry tools. Started letting the boy help with the garden, even when it meant more mess than help. And one morning, when Elsie came outside, she found Levi building a new chair. Stronger, higher, with wheels that would handle rougher terrain. "Thought we might take him down to the river this fall," he said. "Let him see the water up close." Elsie stood behind him, hands pressed over her mouth. Maybe even teach him to fish. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, because she knew what it meant. It meant Levi wasn't just staying. He was living again, and so was she. Later that night, they lay in bed, Daniel asleep in the next room, and Elsie traced the scar on Levi's shoulder. He looked at her. "You think we'll ever be whole?" "No," she said, "but I think we'll be enough." He kissed her, and this time it wasn't cautious. It was sure. It was love, raw and real and scarred, but love all the same. The kind that grows in hard soil, the kind that holds on, the kind that stays. The wind shifted again, but this time it carried no storm. Only the scent of pine and drying hay and river water in the distance. Late summer settled over the land like a warm hand, steady and soft. The valley no longer felt like something Elsie had to survive. It felt like home. A home that was finally shared, not endured in silence. Levi changed in ways quiet but visible. He still rose early, still kept to the rhythm of work in earth and wood, but there was a softness in him now. A gentleness that hadn't been there when he arrived, with winter on his shoulders and sorrow in his jaw. He spoke more, smiled easier. When Daniel called out, he didn't just answer, he listened. When Elsie reached for him, he didn't flinch like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be held. He came willingly, even leaned into her touch. Daniel improved, too, not in the way Elsie once dreamed. His legs didn't wake up, no miracle rose from the dirt. But his spirit grew tall. He no longer looked away when other boys stared. He no longer called himself broken. He chased chickens from his chair and sang off key while he carved crooked ducks from leftover wood. And he laughed, honestly often. That alone was a kind of healing none of them had dared expect. There was a morning in early September when the three of them sat on the front porch with coffee and biscuits, the sun just breaking over the hills. Daniel had carved a rough heart into the porch rail the night before, and when Elsie noticed it, she didn't scold him. She traced it with her fingertip instead. Levi watched her. "You want me to sand it down?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, let it stay. I like it." Daniel grinned. "I put your initials in it, too. Just real small." Levi smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Guess it's official now." They all laughed, and it was the kind of laughter that didn't echo. It sank in, stayed warm. Later that week, Levi brought out something wrapped in canvas. He'd been working on it quietly for weeks out in the barn, never saying what it was. He unwrapped it slow, nervous. It was a table. Handmade, thick and strong. Smoothed edges, legs that didn't wobble. In the center, carved into the grain, were three names. Elsie, Daniel, Levi. She touched the wood with trembling fingers. "You made us a table. You fed me your last bread," he said. "It felt right I give you something that'll hold a lifetime's worth of meals." She looked up at him, tears already rising. "I never expected you to stay. I didn't expect you to love me," he said. "But you did anyway." That night, after Daniel had gone to bed, they stood outside beneath the stars. The trees rustled soft. The world was still. Levi held her from behind, arms wrapped around her middle, chin tucked in her shoulder. "I used to think I was only good at taking things," he said quietly. "But you show me how to give." Elsie turned his arms. "You gave us more than we knew how to ask for." She leaned into him, and they kissed beneath the wide sky, not with hunger, but with belonging. The kind that doesn't ask for more because it finally has enough. They didn't talk of marriage. There was no need. The bond between them didn't require papers or promises made in front of a crowd. Every day was vow enough. Every nail Levi hammered into the barn, every bowl Elsie filled with stew, every time Daniel reached for both their hands at once. That was the ceremony. Autumn came slowly, leaves curling yellow and gold. Levi started preparing the cabin for winter, but not the frantic kind of preparation from before. This was different, measured, hopeful. They had food now. They had stockpiles. Levi even traded in town for a set of proper wheels for Daniel's share. The boy rode around like a king, declaring the cabin a small but mighty castle. In late October, Levi built Daniel a ramp down to the river. It took days of digging and smoothing and hauling rock, but when it was done, they all went down together. Daniel dipped his hands in the cold water and laughed like it was the ocean. Next year, Levi said, "We'll build a fishing dock." Daniel looked up. "Next year?" "Yeah," Levi said, smiling. "We're planning for next year now." That night, when they sat at their table for supper, Elsie said grace for the first time in years. Not out of duty, not out of habit, just because she was grateful. And when she opened her eyes, she saw both Levi and Daniel watching her, soft, full, and whole in a way none of them had ever been before. One night in November, a light snow fell. Not enough to stick, just enough to whisper across the roof and gather on the windowsills. They kept the fire going strong, the house warm. Daniel curled up on the rug with his carved animals. Levi and Elsie sat on the couch on her shared quilt. Elsie rested her head on Levi's chest. "You ever think we'll have a quiet life?" He ran his fingers through her hair. "This already is one, compared to the noise we came from." She smiled. "It's strange. I spent so many years praying for a man to rescue me. And now I know the truth. I didn't need saving. I just needed someone to stay." He kissed her temple. "I'll be here every morning. That's a promise." And he was. The days got shorter. The cold came, but it didn't feel like danger anymore. It felt like a season, just something to pass through together. On the last evening before the snow truly came in, Levi brought out a piece of wood and started carving. Daniel joined him, then Elsie. 3 figures, slow and simple, nothing perfect. A woman with her hair pulled back. A boy with wheels. A man with wide shoulders and tired eyes. Their family, carved into something solid. Elsie watched the firelight flicker across their faces and felt it deep inside her bones. The ache of survival had become the warmth of living. And in that little cabin tucked in the arms of the valley, nothing grand had happened. No riches, no miracles, no fame. Only love, quiet, earned, and meant to last.